Today's episode is brought to you by LaRosse Media. They make professional videos to fit any budget, so next time you need a commercial, promo, or corporate video, think LaRosse. Check them out at larossemedia.com. Hello and welcome to the Stinking Albatross Podcast. My name is Alissa Galobe and I'm here with my partner in crime, my co-host Scott Hayward.
Hey Alissa, how's it going? We got a special guest here today.
We're also here with Noah. He's my 6-month-old son and I'm trying to put him to sleep. I thought he would be asleep by now, but it's not happening. So just bear with me until he passes out and I can sit down again.
That is a comfy looking sweater he's got on there.
Oh, yeah. It's all the best for my firstborn son, you know.
Tell that to my mom.
Yeah. Yeah. So how's it going? We haven't seen you for 2 weeks. What's new? Tell us about your life.
Well, just got back last night from Ottawa. So I know we're going to get into that right off the bat here. But yeah, I got off the train and rolled into bed at 1:30 in the morning. And then my wife is, of course, back to work right now. So she, this is her first day of her shift schedule. So it was me and my daughter, and she was up there, sitting up in bed, kind of batting my face at 7 a.m. So,
oh no,
yeah, not a whole lot of sleep, but that's what we signed up for here. So, yeah, it was interesting traveling, kind of for getting into it at a how do I say this? Like at a regular schedule for the first time in like 3 years. And this is the beginning of it. So a good example of that is just now before we recorded this, I'm kind of taking out all my clothes from my little carry-on that I brought with me up to Ottawa because I was only there for a few days. And I thought, well, I'm in the air next week and the week after that, so I'm not going to put this little carry-on inside like kind of the medium-sized suitcase that goes inside the big suitcase that we keep in our closet. I'm literally just keeping it out until basically Christmas time. So, you know, here we go. It's quite a bit different, I will say, doing this married with kids than it was when I was single or at the very most engaged.
Yeah.
So, yeah. How are things for you on the home front?
Good. I mean, similar to you, I just got back from BC. I did an overnighter there. It was my first time flying, I believe, since I was allowed to fly again. We'll just leave it at that. But it was great. I have such good connections. Like right now, I have such good supporters and connections in British Columbia. You know, I have good friends who pick me up from the airport, who let me stay at their lovely homes and then drive me back. And I did a fundraising presentation in Arnold, which is sort of just outside of Abbotsford. And it was at this lovely home, kind of in the country, and we had about 20 people show up, and it was really good conversation, really good presentation. Got some of those much needed monthly donations, and then had a full night's sleep back, which is something I'm not used to. Overnight, and then headed home the next day. So it was very quick. It was a whirlwind, but it was super productive as well.
Well, why don't you tell our listeners and viewers, kind of what we're up to, and instead of speaking kind of in these cryptic tones about, here and there, because it's quite the schedule that we've made for ourselves between now and almost Easter.
If the light flickers on and off, that's my toddler playing with the light switch. So don't mind.
You sure it's not Aaron?
So right now we're in the midst of a fundraising tour. We haven't been able to fundraise for the last 2 years, obviously due to COVID. At first, excuse you, jeez. At first, we were
just blame the baby, right?
Yeah, always. At first, we weren't able to because there was nothing open, there was no travel, and then we felt uncomfortable doing it because we knew people were losing their jobs, they were suffering financially, things were getting more expensive. So we just, in the middle of a pandemic, we didn't want to do it. So now that things are we're over the hump, and we have 3 people that are on staff, basically. I'm on maternity leave, but we have another girl filling in for me. we need some more monthly donations, and we want to grow our organization. We want to make sure that we have a Right Now representative in each region in Canada. So the West, the North, Eastern Ontario, in Quebec, in Atlantic Canada, in Western Canada, everywhere basically, so that when the nominations start happening for the upcoming federal election, we have our people in place, we have our databases in place, and we're ready to go, and we can win every nomination that we get involved in, basically.
Yeah, this is something that we did back very close to the beginning of our organization. We went out to Western Canada for, I think it was close to 3 months, correct me if I'm wrong, at least 2.5. And we did a number of, basically they're just small little presentations in people's homes. And it's just kind of like a coffee party in the evening or on a Saturday afternoon if it's not during the week. And existing monthly investors of ours are inviting their own personal pro-life contacts who they think are open and willing to invest financially in political success for the pro-life movement. And so we reached out to a number of them over the past couple of months. We're starting to set them up. Like you said, Alissa, you were out in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia less than a week ago, I guess, right? And then I will be hitting the road going to Manitoba, Saskatchewan, 1 or 2 in Ontario before Christmas. And then after Christmas, when it really, really gets busy, Ontario, Saskatchewan again, British Columbia. There's a few that we're setting up for you in Alberta, both Calgary and Edmonton. And yeah, it's really important to do. That's like I said, this is something we haven't done for 5 years, like something serious and getting funds. So when we did it in 2017, it was so that you and I could basically do this as a full-time gig. I think we've talked about this in the past, but for over 2 years when we first started Right Now, we were just taking $1,000 a month each. And that's not, $1,000 on top of, salary or anything like that. It was just $1,000. It was $1,000 to cover rent, of which, it was half, if not a little bit more, and food and gas and insurance and, student debt. And well, we both racked up a ton of debt on our personal credit cards, not for personal expenses, but for business expenses, to pay for flights, to pay for travel, to pay for websites and printing and all that type of stuff. And I would do it again, 11 times out of 10, no question, because it was a little bit of fun, as stressful as it was setting it all up, but it's been so successful. But now we need to expand beyond just you and I, right? Like, for example, this podcast, you have your son hanging off of you, you're trying to put him to sleep, and Abby's, Lord knows where she is, around somewhere. So
she's learned to open doorknobs, which is not a good thing.
so now we're needing more people. We're needing people to be on the ground. And, if this election coming up federally, whether it be in 2024 and 2025, is going to be a change election, which, there's a high likelihood that it would be. You're coming up to close to 10 years of the Liberal government being in power under Justin Trudeau. In Canada, historically, for the past, 40, 50 years, most federal governments only last about 10 years. You think about the Mulroney government, and then the Chrétien government, and then the Harper government. They're all about 10 years, and now we're coming close to that point with Justin Trudeau. So these nominations, specifically for the Conservative Party of Canada, are going to be really, really important. And it can't just be you and I doing it. I think in the last election leading up to it, you and I agreed from, I think it was January 3rd, 2019, all the way to the election, that we were going to work 12-hour days, 6 days a week. And while we could do something similar, we definitely can't do that much now that we have family obligations. And even if we didn't, and we were able to put in that many hours each, it still wouldn't be enough to have the success that we need to have. So it's exciting I don't know about you. I haven't done one of the presentations yet. You did. But I think it's exciting that a lot of our monthly investors said yes. Obviously, we love more. And even people who aren't, monthly investors in ours in Right Now, anyone can say yes to put these together. It's not all that hard to do. And when we were doing this back in 2017, we had a very high close rate. There's a lot of people that buy in, and obviously buy in not just philosophically but financially as well. And I think a lot of our monthly donors that we have are very happy with the results that we've been able to generate thus far. So I'm excited to go do it. It's something we haven't done for a number of years. It will definitely be different doing it now that, married with kids and all that type of stuff. But it's absolutely necessary. And once we're successful in doing it, I'm actually even more excited for what that money will buy, so to speak, going into the next election campaign, because I think we're going to be set up really well. And I think there's a lot of interest from a lot of people wanting to run who are pro-life for conservative nominations. The people have already reached out to us. And so, yeah, it'd be nice to have those resources there for them to make sure that they're successful in winning those nominations. And of course, more importantly, winning those elections whenever they may occur.
Yeah. So, and it's also pretty inexpensive to do something like this. Like, all our supporters basically have to do is just get 20 of their closest friends, family, pro-life supporters in a room, and we'll come to them and we'll do a little pitch. It's a really good pitch. It's tried and true. It's got videos in it, PowerPoint, and it's also intimate, and we are able to answer a lot of questions and discuss a lot of issues regarding their particular province or the country, especially when it comes to social conservative issues. And, all it costs really for us is to pay for our flight out there. And usually we have accommodations with supporters, and then potentially gas wherever we have to travel. But it's honestly not that expensive, and it's well worth it. So we're happy to travel anywhere in Canada to be able to do this, to be able to meet with people, especially in such an intimate setting, and be able to have people buy into what we're doing, because it's really important. And at the end of the day, it's not about me, it's not about Scott, it's not about RightNow or organization or money or Poilieve or the Conservative Party or anybody politically. It's about women and children, and it's about passing laws to protect them. And that's ultimately why we do this. So, if that's the shared universal concept that all pro-lifers have, then hear us out, hear our strategy. One of the people at my last fundraising presentation told me, I thought this was going to be more of a general presentation, but you have everything calculated down to like the hours of door knockers needed and the number of door knockers and everything. He said, I just wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting how calculated it was. And he was really impressed by that. So it's a really good presentation. If you're interested in doing that, if hosting one, just let us know. And we'll be continuing to go on the road for the next few months, and we'll share some stories from that on this podcast in the future.
That's a really great little stream of words you had there, but you said that we have a PowerPoint, and all I could think of the whole time was PowerPoint. Yeah, anyway, we'll keep people updated. The only other thing, and we can wrap it up after this on this particular topic that we'll say about doing these presentations, is that we do try to keep it very low cost as much as possible. So, when I'm going to Saskatchewan the week after next, when I'm flying out to Saskatoon and driving around, I'm stringing together presentations in Saskatchewan. So I'm not going back and forth. I'm trying to get the most amount of money out of, the airline ticket. Same thing when I go to BC in the middle of January, and so on and so forth. So, and then when we're on the road, we try to, if at all possible, if there's a supporter of ours who can lend us their vehicle, so we're not having to pay rental fees. We try not to stay in hotels. We try to stay in host homes. All these types of things that help reduce costs reasonably, of course. That's what we try to do. So how would people get a hold of us to bring us to them to do these presentations? Do they, email us? Do they visit our website? How does that work?
Yeah, they can email us at info@itstartsrightnow.ca. You can join our website, join our database at itstartsrightnow.ca. There's a little join button right when you log in, and we'll get that email, we'll get that message. You can message us on Facebook, on Twitter, basically any social media platform, and we'll make sure to respond. So any way that you want to reach out to us, we'll be happy to respond.
Nature communicates with us in a universal language. The sunrise starts a new day. The sunset marks our accomplishments.
The most beautiful communication is where the speaker and the listener match perfectly and understand the same message.
Your future audience is waiting to hear from you. What message do you need to share?
At La Rosse Media, we fashion beautiful communications through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Create your own most beautiful message. Visit larosmedia.com and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
Now, a few big events happened in the last few weeks since our last podcast that we want to touch base on this week or week, and one of them is just ever progressing expansion of medical assistance in dying, which is basically physician assisted suicide or euthanasia. And we've talked about it in the last podcast about the Quebec physicians wanting to expand it to infants or people, young children who have some sort of disease. It could be, or have some sort of genetic disorder, that kind of thing. And also we've talked about having it expanded to people with mental illness. But one of the stories that has come out in the last few weeks is a second situation of a person who is a Canadian veteran who was facing homelessness and was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And because the government wasn't able to help him with that, he was offered physician-assisted suicide instead as an alternative. And this is a second account of this happening. And so an investigation was launched, and it's come to light that this has happened at least 5 other times with different people wanting assistance from the government who are specifically veterans. And it's obviously a problem. This is not how we pay back our veterans, by offering them physician-assisted suicide if they suffer from that chosen line of work. And, you know, this is really a problem for the Liberal government because they're the ones who constantly want to expand physician-assisted suicide. The Conservatives were the ones who wanted to implement as many restrictions as humanly possible after the Supreme Court forced the government to decriminalize it. And now we're facing one of the most the freest euthanasia laws in the world. It's basically like the hub for euthanasia in the world that Canada's becoming known as, and it's quite problematic.
Yeah, I was going through the article here on Lawrence Macaulay, who's a longtime Liberal member of Parliament from Prince Edward Island. Under previous Liberal leaders, he actually always used to vote pro-life. But under Justin Trudeau, he's been voting either pro-abortion or pro-assisted suicide far more often than not. He said that their office is quite convinced that it's related to one single caseworker who's been offering veterans, medical assistance in dying, basically to off themselves. But even if that's the case, which of course we don't know for sure if that is the case, this is where the cognitive dissonance for the Liberals come home to roost. Not just on this issue, but it'll happen on other issues as well. And it's politically, I don't know how you can. And I know this is going to sound very crass, right? Now I'm kind of thinking politically, how do you work the comms? How do you work the communications on this? Because it was your government that brought in the legislation. And that was an internal debate, if we remember, from 2016 within the Liberal caucus, because there were certain members of the Liberal caucus that wanted the legislation at that time to be far more permissive in terms of medical assistance in dying for physician-assisted suicide. And then there were a lot of Liberals, including people like Dr. Jane Philpott, former MP from British Columbia, with the SNC-Lavalin scandal. She was not the one who was scandalous. She was the one that stood up for justice and then, of course, got fired.
Jody Wilson-Raybould,
who was the Minister of Justice at the time, Dr. Philpott, the Minister of Health. They're the ones that insisted on a lot of safeguards. Obviously not as many safeguards as the Conservatives would have liked to have seen, or a lot of members of the Conservative caucus. But a lot of those safeguards that were in that original legislation are either now gone or being proposed to be done away with. And it's not just veterans. It's there was an instance of a man in St. Catharines, which isn't far from where I live here in Ontario, where he just wasn't being able to make ends meet, and he was having difficulty finding safe shelter, which frankly is very difficult in Ontario because even just for middle class people, like regular shelter, homes, single detached homes, whatever the case might be, is very expensive and very difficult to come by. And he was just, things weren't working out for him. And so he had applied because he had a chronic back pain. He had applied for medical assistance in dying, physician assisted suicide. He was approved by one physician. And so you have 90 days to get approved by another. And so there was a story, as I think a lot of people might be able to recall, that happened earlier this autumn. And in the meantime, what has occurred, it was a random lady that doesn't know this gentleman started a GoFundMe page. And over the course of about a month and a bit, they raised over $60,000 to help this guy, work through things, to try to secure some safe shelter, to, get enough of a food supply to have a decent diet. And he has since taken away his application for medical assistance in dying, which is fantastic. But this is a cognitive dissonance. So you have the Liberal government under Justin Trudeau talking about how they're wanting to reduce poverty, yet at the same time a person who is impoverished is applying for medical assistance in dying for that very reason, using chronic back pain, and admittedly so as kind of an excuse. Really, the real excuse is because he's impoverished. There's the cognitive dissonance. Again, where I'm from in Manitoba, well to the north in northern reserves, and especially when you go into a place like Nunavut, you have very, very high youth-assisted suicide rates, and the government, rightfully so, spends quite a bit of money to help reduce not assisted suicide, just youth suicides in northern reserves and in the territories, particularly in a place like Nunavut. Yet at the same time, you have Liberal members of Parliament and witnesses coming before Parliament musing about expanding the criteria for medical assistance in dying, so that if any of these youth in these areas want to seek out medical assistance in dying, they can do so. Again, another cognitive dissonance, and the stories keep piling on. I'm curious, Alissa. I just got back from Ottawa. I was having a few conversations with different staffers, some different members of Parliament, and it seems to me that as these stories pile on, and they're only going to continue to pile on, that there might be for the first time, maybe just not including Quebec, but there might be for the first time in almost a decade, a general acceptance within the Canadian electorate to actually not only not expand their criteria for medical assistance in dying, but maybe even shorten it to put more restrictions on it. I don't know to the point of eliminating it completely, but I would say I think that there is a appetite out there to have a far more restrictive regime when it comes to medical assistance in dying, physician-assisted suicide, than proposed by the Carter decision from the Supreme Court in December of 2014. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think that was something very interesting that I heard this past week in Ottawa.
Well, I hope that's the case, because right now they're set to expand it to people with mental illness in March of next year, right? And the number of MAID, applications and fulfillments has increased so dramatically since 2016. I have a poll or a stat here that from 2016, according to the Globe and Mail, there were 1,000 MAID deaths, and now there's 10,000 in 2021. So just an insane increase number. And the majority are in Ontario and Quebec, with BC third, Alberta, so forth, and the Yukon in last place, I think just because of, how big they are. But I hope that this is a wake-up call, because I think when you start calling for MAID on infants, for people with mental illness, for veterans, for people who are facing homelessness, this isn't a good look. Like I said, Canada has become the global capital for euthanasia, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And I think that we're getting criticized across the globe, and it's opening the door for a lot of violations and a lot of difficult situations. I know that I was reading one story about a woman who was trying to prevent her son from having physician-assisted suicide because, he had some type of mental illness and had taken care of him her whole life and was going to continue to do so. And in those moments of weakness, he applies for it and it could end his life, obviously. And she's trying to prevent him from doing so because she loves him and she doesn't want to see that happen to him. There was also an article I was reading from the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition from a Dr. John Marr, who's a psychiatrist here in Canada, and he said that he was shocked when a patient recently discussed with him the possibility of MAID because of his belief that no one would ever love him. These professionals get up in the morning to help those in mental distress and prevent suicide, not facilitate it. So it could be something just as simple as that, and people can apply to end their life, which is very, very sad, because if you've ever watched any type of video of someone who has tried to commit suicide, I'm thinking specifically of this one man who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and actually survived. He said the minute both his feet left the bridge, he immediately he didn't want to do it anymore, and he regretted it. And this is something that you can't turn back on, and it's something that the government is assisting. And I feel like we should really learn from the past when the government has assisted, these things on a certain group of individuals, like people with mental illness or homeless or veterans. It never is a good look in the future. And we have to prevent it as much as possible right now, because these are vulnerable people and they need our help in living, not our help in dying.
And I certainly hope that, with some stable leadership within the Federal Conservative Party of Canada, that I don't think this discussion is going away, especially, you have the Sunset Clause report that's due to the House, I think both to the House and the Senate, that was put in the original legislation in 2016. You have different proposals from different colleges of physicians and surgeons. And now you have all these stories. And I think these stories hit people a little bit harder than maybe they would have a couple of years ago, because I think with veterans that always hits. But I think that for a lot of people up until recently, the idea of someone who is homeless and struggling to find housing and maybe having to access a food bank either often or every once in a while was very, very remote. We didn't really know people. Most people, I would say, didn't really know anyone like that. That's kind of like, that part of town, or kind of those people, so to speak. But I think like in the economy that we live in today, I mean, there's lots of reports out there of food banks where they've seen demand for access to food banks increase by a factor of 4, from 10,000 to 40,000 and things of this nature. I know, like, this is a time of year when you have different Christmas cheer boards are getting food hampers together. Somewhere here in Ontario, I believe, it was last year, it was about 10,000 food hampers that were requested, and now it's 40,000 for this year. So obviously it's not just people who are on the streets, so to speak, but it's people who live in maybe a single detached home in kind of your average suburban neighborhood that, yeah, like a Christmas hamper would go a really long way this year. So I think when you hear these stories of that gentleman, for example, in St. Catharines, that unfortunately for a small period of time wanted to end his life because he was struggling so hard, I think that hits people harder now at the end of 2022 than it would have in 2020 or 2021. And so all this to say is that when the next election occurs, whether that be in 2024 or 2025, I think that it's above and beyond all things, it's the right thing to do to put even more restrictions on medical assistance in dying, not expand them. But I think that there is again, not to sound overly crass, but I think there is actually a political opportunity for the Conservative Party of Canada to stand up specifically on that. And I think that, I think Pierre has made some excellent hires over the past couple of months. And I think one example we've seen of the Conservatives under Pierre proposing policies are actual conservative policies and not just things that Liberals did 10 years ago and called them conservative, is this new video that came out, about a week ago or something, on what to do about the opioid crises, I should say, not just crises that we're seeing across Canada.
Yeah, apparently Pierre, traveled quite across BC a few times during his campaign and saw firsthand the destructiveness of the opioid crisis and the drug situation in Vancouver specifically. And so he made a recent video of it called Everything Feels Broken, and he's criticizing the status quo and the concept of safe supply and providing drugs that are not contaminated with toxic opioids to those grappling with addiction. And this is an interesting debate. It's honestly something that I haven't thought that intensely about. My knee-jerk reaction is like, why would there be safe injection sites? Upon reading it, I understand that point of view a little bit more, but I definitely agree with Pierre on his video, because he was talking about a call to restore law and order and better protect Canada's most vulnerable. So instead of providing these sort of like safe injection sites, rather to decrease the addictions and make sure that there's more supports socially for people who are struggling with addiction so that they can overcome, rather than feeding into the addiction and just preventing the overdose with safe injection sites.
Yeah, and there's the numbers are staggering over the past couple of years, and I don't think that the COVID-19 restrictions have had zero effect on that, right? Like I think a lot of people were quite depressed during those times, and I think that's why you saw an increase in the use of these drugs and people being preyed upon, frankly, by organized criminals. Drugs coming across the border from Lord knows where to prey upon these people for financial gain. And it's interesting because you have safe injection sites in a place like Vancouver for a number of years, and I think the numbers were kind of middling at best of what the results have been. But I think in the wake of the COVID-19 restrictions beginning in 2020, I think the numbers tell that, they really haven't had as desired of an effect as people were hoping. And you take a look at a province like Alberta. In a province like Alberta, they don't really have safe injection sites. It's a process, and I'm sure it's a very long and a very intense, laborious, and probably even expensive process, but we are talking about human lives here. So I don't think, any expense should be spared specifically on stuff like this, of getting people what's called into deep detox. Now, I'm not a medical professional, so I don't know what that entails, but it sounds like it's a very intensive, a very long-term process of getting people away from those drugs, from those addictions, and to help them, as Pierre would say, taking control back. Taking control. How does it say? Taking control back of your lives. Am I saying that right? Taking back control of your lives. And I remember him saying this during the leadership campaign, and it just never really hit with me. But I think on this video that he did, which I think is an excellent video, it's an extremely salient point, right? Because if you're going through safe injection sites, are you really taking back control of your life as opposed to doing deep detox? And then there are some studies that have come out over the past year, Alberta compared to BC, on the reduction of the opioid and other kind of those types of drug-related overdose deaths. And there has been a bit of a decrease in British Columbia, but it's almost a 50% decrease in Alberta. And so, for example, you and I, when it comes to RightNow, we always like to talk about RightNow being a conjecture-free zone, doing what actually works, and not, certain methodologies that we might be tied to because we came up with them on a whim or whatever. I think that has to apply here. Some people might argue that, and I think there was pushback in the media last week and the beginning of this week, like, this is just a continuation of the war on drugs. And that may be true, but it seems to me at least to be perhaps a little more targeted, a little more intelligent. And hey, like, the numbers are the numbers, and it seems to be working in Alberta, which is great. And if we can have the federal government financially support those programs across the country to save more lives, then why wouldn't we do that, right?
And then it also goes hand in hand with his sort of like gatekeeper narrative, where the government is not helping people, but they don't know what they're doing, and they're just making things worse. So I think it does go nicely along with his past messaging as well. But what I find really interesting, because they continuously talk about safe injection sites, like shooting up at these sites is safe because it prevents overdose, right? So then Pierre's response to that was, there is no safe supply of these drugs. They're deadly. And he said they're lethal and they are relentlessly addictive. Giving people more of these drugs will not free them from their addiction and will only lead to their ultimate death. this is strikingly similar, I think, to the back alley abortion argument. Not to make it like specifically go back to social conservative issues, but people often talk about safe abortion, and there's no such thing as safe abortion, right? So it's interesting that, you know, he's combating that narrative of keeping people safe at these injection sites by saying there's no such thing as safe injections, basically. Like, these drugs are not safe no matter what, just like abortion is not safe no matter what. So I don't know if that clicked at all while you were researching this, but that was something that really kind of spoke to me. So, and I completely agree. And it's really interesting, too, because in one of the articles that I read, they said that these safe injection sites, one of their lines was, out with the dark alley, fear and shame, they say, in with the safe space, clean injection supplies, care and compassion. I mean, you could literally just copy and paste that when it comes to abortion as well. It's interesting where these two lines are crossing and where the conservatives are veering off, and I'm glad that they're doing that.
You know, and this gets back to me for like follow the science and follow the numbers. And as someone who's a CPA, a chartered professional accountant, like, I'm really big on the numbers that people have been able to tell, you know, watching and listening to this podcast. And you know, that the right now, currently in the past couple of years, safe injection versus deep detox. Well, deep detox absolutely blows safe injection out of the water. So if we are wanting to follow the science and we want to follow the numbers, then we have to do that. And we can't be so ideologically attached to our kind of preconceived notions of what's going to work, what's not going to work. An example of why I think this gets ideological as opposed to scientific and medical based is, I was speaking to a friend of mine last week, and she works in healthcare, and so she had to go in for some upgrade training, and they were talking about addictions and people who have addictions, and in their kind of wokeist language, they said, well, we can't call them addicts, we can't call them addictions, these aren't addictions, you know. And basically, like, all the people who are present at this training are like, okay, so how do we help them? And it was all, oh no, they don't need help. Like, this is kind of like their choice or whatever, as if you can become addicted, and I'm going to use that word, like actually medically, scientifically, physiologically addicted to a drug, and that be a free will choice, right? You know, addictions come in all sorts of circumstances in all different ways, whether it be alcohol, whether it be drugs, whether it be gambling, whether it be pornography, whatever. An addiction is an addiction, and whatever that addiction is, it has control of you, and it's almost very rarely ever a free choice, and it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of deep talks, probably in all those situations, to break free, to take back control of your life, as Pierre would say. So I find it interesting that now we've moved this from, as the liberals, both big L and small, have been saying for almost 2 decades on safe injection sites, you know, follow the science, follow the numbers. Well, the numbers are in, and now we have the results, and so now we clearly have the pathway to go, and they're making it into now they're kind of retrenching into an ideological position. And we know this because we see it in the bureaucracy with that example of my friend in the healthcare field there. So what I find impressive, like, because I think that's interesting, and probably not a false conclusion you came to make that comparison between back alley abortions and shooting up drugs in the back alley. You know, an abortion in a hospital versus an abortion in a back alley, like neither is safe. Just like shooting up drugs is not going to be safe. What I find impressive is that, because, like in my premise there, my rant, that I think this is now becoming an ideological argument and therefore political. What I find impressive is that the conservatives under Pierre have presented an alternative policy that isn't just the policy what the liberals had, you know, 30 seconds ago, like an actual conservative policy. And so far, it seems like they're sticking to it, and they don't care what the media says, and they don't care, you know, what the navel gazers are saying. They're sticking to their policy, and it seems to be generally well received. And I think this is something promising, because frankly, this is not really something we saw under Harper. That this is a little bit new. This kind of goes beyond what Stephen Harper was doing, both as proposing, you know, in elections, and what he actually did in government. So, you know, it's something small. I'm not saying that everything's going to be, you know, roses on every single issue with Pierre going forward, but I think this is a very, very promising sign.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
We live in a world that grows through communication.
Every connection comes from a dream to be heard and realized.
To welcome a better future. What are your dreams?
LaRosse Media will help communicate your vision through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Start building connections to your future audience. Visit larosmedia.com.
And be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
Well, I mean, on that note, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, change topics and mention how my sympathies towards you when it comes to the CFL finals. What's it called? The Grey Cup?
Grey Cup, yeah.
Yeah.
I have multiple thoughts on that.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah, thank you for that. So for those of you who don't know, Winnipeg was going for the first CFL Grey Cup three-peat in over 40 years. The last team to do it was the Edmonton Eskimos back between 1978 and 1982.
You're not allowed to say that.
Hey, that's what the team was called. I can't change that. I can't change history. And so, which is kind of crazy to think in a 9-team league that there's been very few back-to-backs in the last 50 years, but that's the case. CFL is notorious that most players, most teams have 1-year contracts. Very rarely do they have multi-year contracts. But going into the playoffs, they signed, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers signed Zach Collaros to a 3-year contract. They've been signing some other guys to 3-year contracts. So they're actually creating a bit of a window, which is something we talk about a lot in the NHL. You have your contracts, you have your window. Toronto right now with their core with Marner and Matthews and all them, they have a window which is starting to close a little bit. So your window is your time to win championships. Well, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have already won 2 out of 3 championships, been to 3 straight Grey Cups. I think you can use the D word. I think you could call them a dynasty, and I think they have a few more Grey Cups in. We had our mutual friend over. I did, at least, for the Grey Cup. Leslie, who is this huge Argos fan. We go to Argo Bombers games together when they're in town, and he came over. We had some beers. I made some venison chili, whatever, and we both left that night. I wasn't depressed and he wasn't excited. I think we both left in shock because the Argos were definitely the underdogs. So yeah, he left in shock. I left in shock. There's probably 2 plays in the game that I can pinpoint that happened. I don't know why. Buck Pierce, who's the offensive coordinator for the Blue Bombers, asked that the third-string quarterback throw a 40-yard pass that got intercepted with basically 6 minutes left in the game, and they were up 9 points, and they lost by 1 because it's a difference of a touchdown and a field goal. So there's 1 or 2 plays like that. I think they're going to be back. I think they're going to win 1 or 2 more Grey Cups in the next 3 years. And I don't feel too terrible because they back-to-back champions last 2 years. It just would have been really, really cool to see them be the first three-peat Grey Cup champions in basically almost half a century. So,
yeah, I hear you. I'm absolutely devastated.
Thank you for your remorse. But one thing I will say, just talking about sports, because now you have me on this train and it's part of my podcast too, so I can talk about it, is in the NHL, American Thanksgiving, which was yesterday when we're recording this, it's basically a quarter of the way through the season, which is kind of crazy to think that the season is a quarter way through already. And if you look historically, going back, I don't know, things like 40 or 50 years, though teams that are above the playoff line right now, whether it be in a wild card spot, the top 3 in their division, they have a 70% chance, I think it's 71 point something, of actually making the playoffs. So I will say that the Toronto Maple Leafs, I believe, are number 2 or number 3 in their division. Winnipeg is basically tied for number 1 in their division. So it looks like our precious Leafs and our precious Jets will make the playoffs. Your husband's Flames, on the other hand, it's a little more dicey. More dicey.
I have to admit, I have not been paying attention to the Leafs at all.
This is the season to do it.
Well, at first they started off so rough, so
They
I was
did.
like, whatever,
Yeah.
and I just didn't pay attention. But I do keep it, like, I'll follow on Twitter, or I'll check the scores and stuff, so I do know roughly how they're doing, but I don't know like specific things that happen in the games. But now, I'll definitely keep an eye open. We're probably gonna go to a Montreal game over Christmas in Montreal, so like
That's gonna be
the arch
crazy.
nemesis. But it's on the bucket list, so I'll report back on how that was. But I've never gone. I've only gone to Calgary and Toronto, so it'll be cool to see another arena.
Yeah, and that's the biggest one in the NHL too, right? And
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. The Bell
okay.
Center, or whatever it's called now in Montreal. I think it's like 22,500, which doesn't sound huge, but for NHL hockey, that's pretty big. Yeah, the last 10, Toronto 6-1-3. Where's Winnipeg here? Oh, it just changed on me. I think there's something similar. I think there's 6-1-3 as well, or 7-2 or something like that. Jets 6-3-1. So yeah. Anyway,
We'll see.
Yeah, we will see. So.
Well, that wraps up this week's podcast. We'll be back in 2 weeks on December 9th with an all-new episode, so stay tuned for that. Make sure that you like our channel, you subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, basically anywhere you listen to podcasts. For more information, make sure you check out our website, itstartsrightnow.ca. Leave us a comment. We're probably going to be answering questions in a very future episode, so make sure that you send us your questions, send us your comments, anything that you want us to discuss on air when it comes to politics, social conservatism, or anything in between, the Blue Bombers, CFL, NHL,
no
the
Blue
case
Bomber
may be.
talk. I can't. I'm still, in Ottawa, there was a staffer friend of ours, and we met for like an hour to talk business or whatever, and he said, I have to bring it, because he's a Riders fan. He said, I have to bring it up. And he said, we have to talk about it. I know it's raw. And we talked about the 13th man that happened in 2009 for the Riders and everything. But I need a little more time to get there.
Don't email us.
Do not email us about the CFL.
Just email me and I'll make up answers. But thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye for now.